What do people in 2023 think about the women and children first rule? Worked on ships for a long time. Women and children first isn't a thing anymore. There was enough lifeboat space for all, and any attempt to separate families would only cause undue stress, potential confrontation, and ultimately slow down the evacuation process. Also, it only became a rule in the first place because in previous boating disasters, running for the lifeboats became a total free-for-all and basically zero women or kids would survive. It pretty much only existed to give both of those groups a fighting chance at survival. That was literally a one-time call made by the captain of the Titanic, or possibly a call made 2 times by 2 different captains. I can't recall if there was another ship that did the same thing. It is not the policy of cruise companies, and it never was the policy. Incels and other weirdos on the internet sure do love to obsess over the female privilege of getting evacuated first on the Titanic though. As long as the crew doesn't cock it up like they did with something like the Costa Concordia. The recordings of the radio calls between the Italian Coast Guard and the Concordia's captain, already ashore as one of the first to evacuate, especially knowing that even after telling them he would at the end of the argument he never actually returned to the ship, makes my blood boil. And I've only ever seen the ocean once. I can only imagine how professional sailors must feel about that kind of bullterry. So I go on a lot of Carnival ships, and apparently it is a thing still. But when I asked about it, it's apparently just a tool used for loading the lifeboats. There should not be situations where there are too few seats, but there are more than enough boat-wide. So they said to keep everyone consistent and reduce required communication, it's known you load children, then women, then men, and use approximate ages when loading. This means if for some reason the system assigned to many people to a muster the entire cruise ship wide knows exactly how people will be split to another nearby muster. Men are chosen last because they bear no children, and thus there are fewer issues that might prevent them moving quickly to another muster. Not sure if this is true, but it's what I was told. Always children first, but I say everyone afterwards is on equal footing for being saved. In any given life or death situation with children around, get them out of danger and to safety. If it was something where there were groups of families around, yes, send them ahead with a caregiver, obviously send one of the caregivers. Does the person asking this have children? The parents, if in a nuclear family, would feel the same way. I can't imagine caring which of us went with the kids if they were filling boats with children and one parent. If it was something like an attack from people or wild animals, I'd strongly feel like the parents in that situation would want the one most capable of fighting them off to kind of stay behind. Not necessarily the man. I guess I'm at age where I start to see disabled people more, and sometimes it's the wife who is the more capable. If it was a large group of defenders, I could see the stronger of the couple still be one of the weakest people around in general, and they may want to get out of the way of those who are generally more capable. I'm more than okay if one of the caregivers with the groups of children took a seat in that boat, and that meant that a single person without children had to wait with the rest of us for the next chance at an empty boat. I don't have children if that matters. Nevertheless, I feel strong protective instincts towards them when things like this come up, especially hearing about the school shootings, war in Ukraine, refugees, etc. I'm not sure if it's socialization or biological instincts. I do want those helpless little ones protected though, and gotten out of harm's way ASAP, along with someone to take care of them. Not only for long-term reasons either. I'd take care of them as keep them calm. Possibly quiet too, depending on the danger, and able to carry them, move them around, etc. Possibly even feed them if they weren't weaned yet. Saying only put the children on a boat and keep all adults off until the next one is naive and just wouldn't work realistically. I'm okay giving my space up for a mother or a father with children. Women and children first is literally just because if you don't let the physically weaker people off the boat before the panic of impending death fully takes over a group, you're not gonna have any women or children survivors. This policy was literally enacted because, before this policy, All the survivors of shipwrecks would be men, because men would always be the ones who win the push down and float on top of other people in order not to drown contest. And we decided that was a bad look. If you don't think that's a bad look, then, by all means. I think the argument is dumb. For children, there is arguably a utilitarian argument in terms of how much longer they are likely to live if saved. In the same sense, a 90-year-old person is going to be lower priority for a transplant. But I don't think that level of self-sacrifice is realistic to just expect from people as a matter of course, and would never villainize someone for simply trying to save their own life in a crisis. Controversial opinion. There is a utilitarian argument to be made that children and elderly have the least value and priority. Society has yet to invest a full load of resources into children, schooling, job training, etc., while it has already extracted a vast majority of the productivity out of the elderly. In this sense, the worst loss is a late 20s, early 30s professional. They have already consumed a lot of resources from society, finished all their schooling, now in the early stages of their careers, but have not yet had the opportunity to contribute their potential value, which is less hypothetical than the potential of children. I think this whole question is dumb without any other context. If we're talking about something like a single plane crash, then the reality is it doesn't matter if we all die. There's 7 billion people on the planet, and one plane won't make a difference to our survival as a species. If we're talking about an end-of-the-world scenario, then you have to value fertile women more than any other group. A man can impregnate lots of women, but women can only have so many children. Children may even be less valuable than a man in his athletic prime, as children are going to be dependent on adults to provide for them, while providing very little to the survival of the group. I think this was implemented due to the issues that came when men would only try to save themselves. They'd overwhelmingly leave their families and cause issues for everyone else trying to be saved. Fights, arguments, and sabotage. Then there would be a bunch of women and children stuck on lower levels, or in difficult situations, and no men to help them escape. Instead, they would all rush to safety alone and cause problems. And this attitude is why people who don't calmly wait for the children to be taken off the boat get locked in a cabin below decks and left to drown. Any hint of panic, and you are out of the survivors groups, because 70% of any given group of people will do what the people next to them are doing. So any panic has to be instantly squashed. Your odds of surviving as a group go down dramatically if a single member panics, so you are taught to physically exclude people who are panicking in survival situations. As a rule of the sea, it made a lot of sense when women's fashions meant that they were going to have more trouble swimming no matter how strong they were. And there weren't necessarily enough lifeboats for everyone. Today, there ought to be enough time and space for everyone to get off a sinking boat. I'd hope that priority would be given to anyone who needs support. I worked on a cruise ship in 2003. While I worked in the casino, we all had emergency positions in case something happened, and I was assigned to a lifeboat. This meant that I had to keep a bunch of annoyed people lined up on deck for 15 minutes while they listened to some recorded speeches about safety over the intercom. When we were trained, though, we were specifically told that if we ever actually had to use the lifeboats to evacuate the ship, it was women and children first, men last. It seems odd as they would all fit on the boat, but that was the rule. Where this idea comes from, I think, is that if it was a matter of who fought their way into the proverbial lifeboats first, the average healthy man is going to beat out the average woman and child most of the time. And while men are every bit as deserving of life as women and children, they shouldn't use their physical strength to push women and children out of the lifeboats, so to speak. Maybe a better way to put it is that in a crisis situation, those who are capable of helping others should try to help those who need it instead of only thinking of themselves. Women and children first was a doctrine developed by ocean liner companies after a series of disasters in the early days of transatlantic travel. On the SS Atlantic, every single woman and all but a single child died because women and children were segregated from the men. The ship sank stern first, where the women and children were, and most drowned before reaching the deck of the ship. In another sinking, the SS Arctic ran another boat and sank. The men and the crew mutinied and took the lifeboats against the captain's orders. Many of the remaining men spent the hopeless sinking, getting drunk, and attempting to rape the women in their final moments. We only know this because the captain and 5 others lived through the sinking by holding onto floating debris. After incidents like these, many of the ocean liner companies adopted a women and children first policy for loading lifeboats. What I do like about the concept is that it's the reverse of physical dominance, which feels like it can still be relevant. For instance, in a trapped space with limited escape routes, if men, who are largely bigger, stronger than women and children, consider themselves first, they can literally push, shove, and stomp on women and children far too easily. Maybe the general, more modern concept could be, look to those around you. If someone is smaller or weaker than you, try to help them get out, instead of shoving them out of the way or climbing over them. I know survival instincts are sometimes not very empathic, but I think that looking out for those around us who aren't as strong is part of the beauty of human communities, and I think this principle is an extension of that. Before I had a child, I was definitely Yale, women and children first, but now my thinking is, people won't like this, but my child is more important than any of you, and I'm not taking the chance of leaving her without a father. I'm not a father, but I totally get it. Unfortunately, every other father will be doing the same, and a lot of people who aren't fathers will have themselves to look after, so the whole thing will be a crush. I'd like to say I'd give my seed up for any child, and just have to figure it out from there, most likely going to drown. Apparently it's a peaceful way to go. I'm not sure how, but I'll take that. But yeah, the father versus father battle is where most of this conflict is going to occur. Get training now, lads. PC doesn't count. Children first for sure. And whoever their main caretaker is for sure, which is still majority women. So in principle, maybe not, but in practice, absolutely. To the children and their caregiver and parent. No to random woman versus random man. But in reality, it depends on the situation. If it's an evacuation situation on a train or bayo, I'd say kids and those with mobility issues should be prioritized. If you're on a plane, it's whoever is closest to the door gets out first. You're not being gentlemanly blocking an area so a nice lady behind you can get out first. If the world is about to end, kids and those who can make kids, more than one gender, get priority. Ultimately, is women and kids first rule at all, let alone one that ever gets used. Looking at Turkey, they are not saving men to get to women first. Women were seen as vulnerable dependents like children, and then elderly people, which is why they were included in that rule. I highly doubt that it was because they were primary caregivers, as really, children would have a better chance with the father, as men were the breadwinners, and there was less stigma around men, even with children remarrying to basically replace that mother role. I'm an every man for himself kind of guy, but in this context, my wife and children are more important to me than you or your spouse and children. Therefore, if it comes to a survival situation, I will be prioritizing me and mine over you and yours. Don't take it personally. But I don't know you, I don't know your children, so to me you are real low on the totem pole. And I'm totally fine if others want to look at it the same way. Survival of the fittest, baby. In a life or death situation, I don't care about other men, women, or children. I'm putting myself and the people I care about over all of them. I value my life over a random person I don't know. And I'm sure they value their life and their family, friends lives more than me. So I don't blame them if they choose to do the same. I'll still fight them for my survival, but if I lose, oh well, I'm not gonna think they're a villain for trying to live. While it may sound chivalrous or patriarchal, it's not. It's a practical way to ensure that the most people survive. The average man is stronger than the average woman or child. Obviously, there are exceptions. If a building is burning, it will be getting worse and harder to get out as time goes on. If you hear these things from a young age, it will help you in times of emergency by giving you a rough idea of what to do, even without proper training. The Birkenhead drill is a code of conduct not maritime law. And in 2023 there should be lifeboats aplenty for everyone. But it makes sense. When people panic, they trample the smaller and the weaker. And women, and in particular children, are smaller than men. It's been shown that in these disasters, men are more likely to survive than women. One example was the sinking of the MS Estonia in the Baltic Sea. In that case, nearly all of the survivors were young men, and no one under 12 survived. At one point, most of the survivors had to climb up a heavily listing ship to get out. Anyone without a lot of upper body strength was not going to make it. I think this holds true for many maritime disasters. Funnily enough, I always thought the point of women and children first would be to repopulate on the desert island. It never occurred to me how unlikely that scenario would be, as it's an emergency to them, but a minor, almost invisible inconvenience to the species, so the rule shouldn't even apply. We did that because 10 women can all get pregnant by one man, and because kids have their whole life ahead. But as it is for now, we should just save as many as possible, with kids as a priority. For obvious reasons. Fortunately though, we almost always have enough lifeboats, parachutes, whatever for everyone. I said almost only because of defective boats or parachutes. Even so, there are most certainly some emergency backup stuff to deal with that. So in conclusion, depends on the situation. Ideally, we would save everyone, but if 1 meter lives are at risk, then yes, women and children first. But if it's 100 people, then no. It makes me mad to even hear it mentioned. It instantly reminds me of the Titanic, of how families were ripped apart, and the first lifeboats left half empty, just because they didn't want to let in any men. I mean, of course don't shove women and children aside because you are stronger. But women and children should never be the only ones who are saved. Children, sure. Women, no. That is part of the holdover of the old social contract between men and women. Work tore up that contract. I'm not upholding my end of a contract that the other party refuses to follow. That contract is null and void. My life is not less valuable than someone else's life because they are a woman and I'm not. I'm not giving up my life for some strange woman, especially considering she probably automatically hates me because I'm male. Children first makes sense. Women just doesn't. Men are stronger physically than women. As a situation escalates, they are more likely to be able to physically overcome the increasing odds. I am a woman who works out 4 days a week doing heavy lifting at the gym. Despite this, the weakest man there is still stronger than me. Any guy could help move debris or lifeboats better than I could, and I'm in the best shape of my life. That's why it's best to keep men around longest during emergencies. They have the best chance to help others and help themselves due to their biological advantage. I don't want to say where I work, but where I work, if we need to evacuate, I was told it's people with medical conditions first, then women and children. I got hired years ago, but they haven't told me otherwise when we do evacuation training every year. So I guess it's not totally obsolete, after all. Makes sense. I mean, let's be real. What man is going to leave when there are women and children still waiting to leave? I couldn't imagine leaving women stuck somewhere while I go free. That's just not gonna happen. I'm sure this thread is full of people talking about equality and feminism and blah blah blah. However, one thing I've always admired about that particular mindset is that women and children first in an emergency is a tacit and presumably inviolable acceptance amongst the men that we're in a bad situation. The idea that we collectively recognize the problem and have a ready-made cultural solution to set aside all else and work together to maximize the amount of good we can salvage from the situation is incredibly inspiring to me. It's honestly the perfect way to deal with the type of emergencies associated with it. I defy someone to prove otherwise. I assume this is in the case of a sinking ship with limited room on life rafts. This entire situation comes down to logic. The logical reasoning would be for women and children to survive. Think about this. What is better for future survival and reproduction? 100 men and 1 woman, or 100 women and 1 man? The obvious answer is 100 women and 1 man, as procreation is much faster and more efficient, enabling better odds of survival. Children are obviously first because they are our future. and women should be the ones accompanying the children due to their nature of nurturing, alongside their ability to repopulate at a greater rate. There is a reason that men are the ones sent into combat. It's partially because we are bigger and stronger, but it's also because we are expendable, as cold as that sounds, but it's the logical path when it comes to survival. I say this as a man. That's a curious question in a time where the pursuit of equality is prevalent. My wife and kids always go first. There's no other option. I couldn't live with myself if there was a situation I escaped, and they didn't. When it comes to other people though, children first regardless. There's no other option there either. I still would help women first because it feels like the right thing to do to me. I mean, I would still help a man if they needed it. But if some dude came pushing through and wanted to be saved, I don't know how I'd react. Probably tell them to stop being a cunt and help out. That's not a question I can answer unless I'm in the situation. When you've spent your life thinking as low of yourself as I have, you realize that there are a lot of people out there who can do more with their lives. I like to think that a sacrifice on my part can help that. I get why it has been a thing. If we want the population to continue, we need women to carry children. No, I'm not saying that's all women are good for. Men have never carried children. That is the simple truth. Although important to our society just as much as women, the one thing they cannot do is carry and give birth to a child. One man can father multiple children from many different women, so less men would work temporarily. Although men do most labor jobs, eventually it would bite us in Theto suddenly have less labor workers. As for children, they are most innocent and need help. And it would be more difficult to watch and hear children get left behind. It must be weird though being a man and seeing that you are often the sacrifice. Same thing with the draft. I see a lot of people saying this is about sinking ships and disaster type situations. But isn't this just a general rule in a vast amount of scenarios? I know, for example, in indigenous communities, when there was a meal, the order the people would be served in would be elders, children and mothers, women, and then the men. And it goes for multiple cultures, and more than a disaster or a meal, like a man holding the door for his kids and wife. I always just perceived this as a general rule based off of the fact that back in the day, and up until recently, and still often to this day, men were perceived as the protectors or sunt, and we put the safety of the farer and children before us. Another example would be ladies first. I know that in some relationships, the roles are reversed, or that there aren't always gonna be men in every situation to do the expected things, but I think it's a good expression, and that in certain communities or relationships where this is the norm, the men should live up to it. I also think it's a good thing as a man because it doesn't you to be polite. And if someone gives you crap for being a man and doing a kind gesture for them, just tell them that you were just trying to be polite, and that you're sorry they took it that way, and then move on with your day. Stay strong, brothers, and to everyone in general, have a good day, a good night, and don't take life for granted and view everyone as a damn human being. There are two reasons for the women and children first thing. The first reason is moral. Children first because there is a moral duty to save children. Women first as a matter of chivalry. The second reason is practical. Without some simple rule, the argument goes, what you likely would get is a free-for-all in which the strongest push to the front and the weakest get trampled. In such a panic, more lives may be lost than necessary. Since men are, on average, stronger than women, obviously not in all cases, but on average, a rule that restrains them from trampling to the front makes sense. As a means of disciplining the crowd, the rule could be rephrased in a lessist manner, as the strongest should hold back. See that the weakest get saved first. The purpose isn't simply a moral imperative, but practical, to prevent a panicky stampede. Obviously, the chivalry bit hasn't aged well in our society. It is associated with all sorts of infantilism of women. I've seen some people prioritize mobility-restricted people in the comments. Why? It takes longer to rescue someone like that, and chances are in that time you could have saved more people. In a Titanic scenario, they might not even survive the rescue. If you can drag someone with you, do it. but I wouldn't prioritize them. The idea of children and women first is historically because few men can repopulate a civilization with many women, but not the other way around, and children take many resources to carry and birth, so already having a living one is better. We don't really need more humans though. You could do it because of tradition or emotional bonds, but objectively we don't really need this prioritization in this modern world. Then again, wait, rescue speed. Life ratio is pretty good, so you might save more people that way.